In the summer of 1921, the hills of West Virginia erupted into the largest armed insurrection in United States history since the Civil War. 10,000 coal miners wearing red bandanas around their necks marched through the mountains with rifles in hand. They weren't fighting a foreign enemy. They were fighting for the right to organize, for decent wages, and for basic human dignity. This is the story of the Battle of Blair Mountain, a chapter of American history that powerful interests have tried to bury for over a century. To understand Blair Mountain, you need to understand what life was like in the coal camps of southern West Virginia. The coal companies didn't just employ the miners, they owned everything. The houses, the stores, the schools, even the churches. Miners were paid not in US dollars, but in company scrip, currency that could only be spent at company stores, where prices were inflated by as much as 40%. A popular song of the era captured it perfectly. I owe my soul to the company store. The mining companies maintained their iron grip through a private army of detectives and guards, the most notorious being the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. These weren't security guards in the modern sense. They were mercenaries with machine guns, given deputy sheriff badges by compliant local officials. They evicted union organizers, beat strikers, and murdered those who dared to speak out. In Mingo County alone, these company thugs had killed at least 50 people between 1912 and 1921. The spark that ignited Blair Mountain came on May 19, 1921, in the small town of Matewan. When Baldwin Felts agents arrived to evict miners who had joined the United Mine Workers Union, they were confronted by the town's police chief, Sid Hatfield. Hatfield, just 27 years old, had taken the miners' side. A gunfight erupted on the main street. When the smoke cleared, 7 Baldwin Felts detectives lay dead, including 2 of the agency's founding members. 2 miners and the town's mayor were also killed. Sid Hatfield became a folk hero overnight. But the coal companies and their allies in government weren't about to let this stand. On August 1, 1921, as Hatfield walked up the courthouse steps in Welch, West Virginia, to face trumped-up charges, Baldwin Felts agents gunned him down in broad daylight. They shot him 15 times. No one was ever prosecuted for his murder. The assassination of Sid Hatfield was the final straw. Within days, miners began gathering in the town of Marmot. They came from hollows and coal camps across southern West Virginia, carrying whatever weapons they could find: hunting rifles, pistols, even old Civil War muskets. By August 24, between 8,000 and 10,000 armed miners had assembled. Their plan was to march to Mingo County, free imprisoned Union members, and organize the non-Union mines along the way. Standing in their path was Sheriff Don Chafin of Logan County, known as the Czar of Logan. Chafin had received hundreds of thousands of dollars from coal companies over the years. In return, he ran Logan County like a personal fiefdom, brutally suppressing any Union activity. When Chafin learned of the miners' march, he deputized 3,000 men, many of them coal company employees, and positioned them along the ridges of Blair Mountain. The miners, now called the Redneck Army for the red bandanas they wore, knew they were marching into a trap. But they kept coming. Many were World War I veterans who'd fought for democracy in Europe, only to return home to find themselves living under industrial tyranny. As one miner put it, "We fought for freedom over there, and we're going to fight for freedom here." The first shots were fired on August 31. For the next 5 days, the Battle of Blair Mountain raged across a 25-mile front. The fighting was unlike anything seen in America since the Civil War. Machine gun nests raked the valleys. Snipers picked off targets from the ridges. The coal companies even hired private planes to drop homemade bombs and poison gas on the miners' positions. President Warren G. Harding, under pressure from coal industry lobbyists, declared martial law and threatened to send in federal troops. But the miners kept fighting. It wasn't until September 2, when U.S. Army bombers appeared over the battlefield, that the miners began to realize they couldn't win. These were the same type of planes that had bombed German positions just 3 years earlier. Now they were being used against American citizens on American soil. Faced with the might of the U.S. military, the miners' army began to dissolve. By September 4, most had returned to their homes. The Battle of Blair Mountain was over. The immediate aftermath was swift and brutal. Nearly 1,000 miners were arrested. Many were tried for treason against the state of West Virginia. While most were acquitted by sympathetic juries, the legal costs bankrupted the United Mine Workers in West Virginia. The coal companies had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The publicity surrounding Blair Mountain had exposed the brutal conditions in the coal fields to the entire nation. When Franklin Roosevelt became president in 1933, one of his first acts was to sign the National Industrial Recovery Act, which guaranteed workers the right to organize. By 1935, the United Mine Workers had successfully organized most of West Virginia's coal fields. The physical scars of Blair Mountain can still be seen today. Bullet holes pock the trees. Spent cartridges turn up in the soil. But for decades, the coal companies and their allies worked to erase this history. School textbooks in West Virginia didn't mention Blair Mountain. The battlefield itself was threatened by mountaintop removal mining. It took a sustained campaign by historians and activists to preserve the site and the memory of what happened there. The Battle of Blair Mountain matters because it shows how far those in power will go to maintain their wealth and control. It matters because it demonstrates the courage of ordinary people willing to risk everything for dignity and justice. And it matters because the issues at stake, fair wages, safe working conditions, the right to organize, remain contested ground in America today. When modern workers fight for a living wage, when they demand safe working conditions, when they insist on having a voice in their workplace, they stand in the tradition of the Blair Mountain miners. Those 10,000 men who marched through the West Virginia hills weren't radicals or revolutionaries. They were Americans who believed that democracy shouldn't end at the factory gate or the mine entrance. The red bandanas of Blair Mountain have faded, but their legacy endures. In every strike, in every union drive, in every fight for economic justice, the spirit of those miners lives on. They remind us that rights are never given. They must be taken. And sometimes, taking them requires standing up to the combined power of corporations and government, even when the odds seem impossible. The Battle of Blair Mountain was erased from history books for a reason. Those who profit from keeping workers divided and powerless don't want us to remember that ordinary people once took up arms for their rights and nearly won. They don't want us to know that it took the U.S. military to stop American workers from claiming their share of American prosperity. Most of all, they don't want us to remember that when pushed too far, working people have the power to shut down entire industries and shake the foundations of the established order. Today, as wealth inequality reaches levels not seen since the 1920s, as workers struggle with stagnant wages while corporate profits soar, as union membership declines and worker protections are rolled back, the lessons of Blair Mountain are more relevant than ever. The miners of 1921 understood a fundamental truth. Power never yields without a fight. They paid for that understanding with their blood. The question for our time is whether we'll honor their sacrifice by continuing their struggle, or whether we'll let their memory fade into the forgotten corners of history.